All right, we're at 9:02, so we're going to go ahead and kick off. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I'm excited to be here with just an amazing group of people. So we have Norm Kromberg, who is a veteran in the world of third-party risk. He has spent the last 25 years doing everything from working with the regulators and doing the examination work up to being a CISO within some really amazing companies. I'm going to let him tell a little bit more about that, but we also have Karina Klever here, who's been in the world of tech for the last 35 years. She has helped build a uh, center of excellence in GRC in the Fortune 500. She has worked with many, many companies to build programs that are really focused on solving risk and doing the right thing for the business. And we also have Blake Hoge here, who is also worked at some amazing companies. He's leading third-party risk in at Airbnb and has about 15 years, I think, of experience in GRC, mastering the world of third-party risk. So I'm really excited about this. I'm going to go ahead and pass pass the mic, so to speak, and have Norm go ahead and introduce himself, and then we'll pass to Karina, to Blake, and then we will go ahead and kick into our topics of the day. So, Norm.
Um, Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation today. As Rachel said, I've been in the industry actually over 30 years, and I've been described as a unicorn because I started out as a business person in banking. Then evolved into as I was a bank examiner with the Comptroller of the Currency, specializing in technology assessments. It's where my foundation of third-party risk began because we were talking to companies and financial institutions about their SaaS 70s. We actually were examining service providers. Um, and I did one of the first software assessments they ever did on a piece of banking software. That evolved into leading technology audit functions at global companies, then becoming involved in Sarbanes-Oxley, then quality assurance, and as Rachel mentioned, Chief Information Security Officer. And in those roles, I actually was in regulated industries such as payment, credit card processing, and non-regulated, which is retail and distribution firms. So I've seen this from a number of different angles. And I will say, because of the business background, I do post some contrarian views at times that you may hear today and may cause a few people to pause if they're dedicated to the third-party risk area. But it's always good for that perspective to be a reminder for what we're in this for. Karina?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Thank you. So, wow, my camera just did something weird. All right. So I started IT as a computer operator in April 1989, working graveyard. I worked with punch cards and tape mounts, and I became an AS400 programmer. And I hated getting bad specs. So I became a project manager, program manager, and in '02, an old boss called me and said, "Get these auditors off my back." And I'm like, "Dude, what are you talking about? I'm a PMO director. I've got we're doing well." And he goes, "No, name your price." And I was like, "Well, okay, it's time to learn all about audit." And that was in ready for Sarbanes-Oxley. And, that was banking. I can't really name a lot of companies, but have worked with in the pharmaceutical space, in all kinds of different regulations, right? Different frameworks, retail, stood up GDPR for a Fortune 100 company before it became law. So now I run a really boutique compliance management as a service company. We really focus on appropriating controls for customers and getting them out of the noise and the busy work of all of those 20,000 row spreadsheets that are full of ethereal, vague, and nebulous controls that don't even really apply to their actual operations. So that's kind of what we're now known for. So I'm going to pass it on to Blake.
Hey everyone, and thanks for the intro, Rachel. So out of college, I started in the consulting world, just maybe like some of you guys as well. Didn't really know what I was doing. Got thrown around on different clients and was kind of the subject matter expert of the week at that client for that industry or whatever project it was. After doing my stint there in consulting, I moved over to Salesforce, where I focused more so on the third party security, specifically like on our first party data centers and all of our global BPO call center. So that was a really fun experience there. Did some of the GRC work as well. From there, I moved over to Instacart, where I built out third party security as well as the customer trust programs there, also helping on the GRC. So whether it's SOC 2 or your ISOs, HIPAA, those sorts of things. And then I'm currently sitting at Airbnb doing third-party security as well. So happy to be here and look forward to hopefully sharing some knowledge with you. Yeah, excited.
Thank you. And I love that term, third party security. It sounds like a much better term than some of the ones that we hear out there. So just for a little background as well, I realized I did not introduce myself. I'm Rachel Curran. I am the CEO and co-founder of Blocktivity. We are trying to help people shift left with our third party risk programs and really move from this kind of cost center, very busy work model to something that is helping drive business resiliency and making that easy. So, very excited to be here today. I would love to start off. Kind of the teaser of this session was that we just keep hearing TPRM is broken. So I'm going to pitch it to the three of you. TPRM is broken. Agree or disagree, and why? And let's keep this relatively short as we move into other topics, because I think we could talk all day on this. But Norm, I'm going to go ahead. You mentioned you might have some certain views there. Norm, why don't you take it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And as I said, I'm a contrarian. So if you look at your question, Rachel, is TPRM broken? My first response is yes. And that response comes from, again, I've managed SAS 70 portfolios. I've dealt with this in a number of different ways. I'm now a fractional virtual CISO for several firms. I was actually on a call this morning with the CEO of a technology startup. And he goes, I am highly frustrated with client questionnaires, having to do SOC 2 reports and all this. And he goes, adds no value. I need to get the contract side and have revenue. And they're asking questions that don't apply. And so I was coaching him through, well, this is a necessary evil in the industry. It's driving certain things. Well, the reason I think it's broken is we've got bureaucratic processes. People are asking questions, things like that. So what I posed to him, let's create a business opportunity here. Provide the fundamental data. Let's get a SOC 2. Let's get your basic information available. Then if a customer or potential one, especially an existing customer, wants you to do a questionnaire, yes, we will do that as a service offering. And I was bold to say, let's charge them $1,000 an hour to do work to fill out forms for the data they've already received. Because quite frankly, the CEOs are going, this is not critical to the business. I need to get revenue. And actually the requests don't match the services being offered. So I think we've got some bureaucratic processes and flows. And I think this is related to, I've heard several firms talking about reducing security budgets where a lot of this goes by 25% in 2025. So there are some business factors playing into that. So Rachel, that's my response to your question. Is it broken? Yes. And that's some of the reasons why. And I probably could go for hours on this, much like we talked in the past, but
Yeah.
love to hear the other views.
So I'll chime in. I think that we've created so many liabilities for ourselves that we have no idea where our data is, how many instances of our data we have. It's stacked everywhere and anywhere. We haven't mapped our data. We haven't classified our data. There are companies who are encrypting publicly available data. Get rid of it, right? We have a data hoarding principle in place. And, between the contract that says, we're not responsible for your data, and the terms of service that says you have to send us all of your important data, and the little exclusion, subservice organizations aren't covered in SOC 2s, but we send it to these 78 vendors that we have on our side. We have no idea where your data actually goes. No accountability for elevated privileges, not only within your vendor, but now your vendor's vendors. We are flinging data everywhere. I just pulled HHS's OCR breach report. I think this last weekend, we're at 70% of the population, over 70% of the US population, 260 million individuals are currently involved in an active investigation where their data has been lost, their PHI, ePHI has been lost. That's not ever. That's not in all of history. That's currently open investigations. Sorry, we lost your data. Oops, here's a credit report for you. We're being incredibly negligent in this industry of how we're treating data. We haven't identified it, and it just magnifies as we continue to pass it on from vendor to vendor to vendor. That's my take.
Just to add on that, we can blame third parties for all of our problems all day long, but at some point there's some accountability internally. So when I think third party security and some of these, is it broken? Yes. I think if from the lens of shared responsibility, right? They have responsibility for managing whether it's a platform or their user access or security controls. But the same goes for us. So if I'm an internal user trying to procure a third party, it's really in my best interest to making sure I'm, doing data minimization. I'm not oversharing sensitive data that doesn't need to be shared. I'm making sure that, users on our team, when they're leaving, we're following our termination and access removal processes and scrubbing data, removing pixels, making sure that we're setting APIs and getting approval to new systems before the third party risk management team finds out later, like, hey, did you connect with Workday this last year? Oh yeah, we did, but we're only pulling, employee social or whatever. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around, but internally it's one of those things of like, do we actually need these tools? Where can we consolidate? Because back to what others have just said is like, we have an inventory issue, we have a data classification issue, like we have a mess all over the place, and it's propagated initially from us internally, which is a huge problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's our risk is the way I look at that versus third party risk. I think that's really great. So moving a little bit into solutions, I guess. What do we do about these things? So let's break down some of the risks. So I think you, Karina, it really got into some of the challenges around the data side, and Blake obviously getting into our controls, but there are tons of breaches. We know that the interconnectivity of our third parties, not just how many we're using, but you guys have alluded to this, that there's a lot of integrations, there's a lot of other third party, their fourth parties, fifth parties, what have you. So there's this proliferation and just complication, and breaches are on the rise. The last I've read is 61% of companies report third party related breaches, right? That's huge. And the numbers you're quoting, Karina, is massive. So in that, what are the most concerning risks that we should be thinking about? Because there's so much out there. So I'll hand that, Blake. Do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple, and I agree 100%. Like, I go on the news every day, and there's some sort of breach going on, and I personally get scared of like, is my data been compromised? And I start losing sleep over, it, and I'm sure all you guys can relate.
Yes, it
But
has.
a couple areas that come first and foremost to me would be like security and privacy risk, right? Like from data privacy, like what data, with all these tools and third parties we're connected with, right? We're sharing sensitive data, we're sharing business, intellectual data, confidential data, all these things. So if there's for example, your third party is not patching and they get compromised, like now you have all this sensitive information that's being shared out who knows where. So that's one of the areas of like, security privacy risk. Another one would be like availability, right? That's a big thing. Like all of us are relying on several big, service providers such as your AWS, GCP, et cetera. Um, if one of those goes down, how are you keeping your uptime and your commitments, your SLAs to your customers and running your work streams, your custom or your third parties are doing that as well. So for me, it comes to mind of like making sure like you're doing business continuity management, disaster recovery, tabletop exercises, making sure that you keep your availability services or your third parties are doing that for your behalf. And one last thing I'll add, and I'll pass to others. Just like regulatory. So thinking like your GDPR, CCPA, those sorts of things. If one of your third party has a breach or an incident, how is that going to impact you from a regulatory, legal, reputational damage, those sorts of things. So those are a couple that come to mind. So.
Great. Where, you mentioned things they should be thinking about. Where are they falling short? And Karina, I think you have some thoughts on this, but where are companies falling short on thinking about these risks or managing them?
When I walk into a client and I say, tell me where your data is, sometimes they ask me to come back half a year later. Say, I have no idea. Right. And it all literally starts with our data classification, our data mapping. And then we start doing really creative, amazing technology things. And we set up an API and it's been 7 years. Who's checked it? Where's it going? What's the password? We've discovered that we're sending data places that don't even exist anymore, but we're sending the data, right? So trying to do some of those very basic housekeeping things. Now, one of the bigger issues is the disconnect between the contracts, the statements of work, the terms of service. But looking at it holistically and asking those core questions, I'm kind of in the party of show me how you need my most important data. Yes, Blake, absolutely, I agree with you. You have to take the accountability for your own data and your own security that you put around your data. But part of that security is moving it on to other vendors and then understanding any downstream vendor usage. But the APIs, at the very least, know where your data is, classify it, map it, all the way down to your vendors and vendors, and then figure out what your API usage is. That's one of our biggest risks right now in the industry.
I definitely would agree. I think that just brings up, I think, a couple of important points around the contracts that I hear and think about are the statements within contracts that say that data can be used for improving the services. And in the day of AI, that's something that really has to be looked at, just to call out. And then another one that brings to mind for me is just the least privilege. Like I would love to see third parties really embrace that with the APIs, with the what they're collecting. I mean, it's not really, we call them third parties, service providers. All of us should be thinking, yeah, go ahead, Karina.
I add one thing for as far as regulations and frameworks go, there are very passive, generic statements that exist in our regulations and frameworks that say, go set up a vendor management program. Right. So they don't specifically say tier your vendors and understand which one's the riskiest. They don't say, one vendor doesn't get a questionnaire at all, whereas the other one that's getting our golden eggs, they get the big one. We want to really work with them and collaborate with them and understand that. When we are looking to regulations and frameworks to give us guidance on how to set up a vendor management program, it's almost non-existent. On a SOC 2, it's checkbox. Sure, you showed me a policy that says you have a vendor management program. Done. I'm going to move on to the next. Right. So because it's so passive, that passiveness has not caught up with how involved our infrastructure environments are right now with each other. And that passiveness isn't cutting it anymore.
That's a really great point. So one, I just want to point out, I think this is great that Federica pointed out that one of the issues is that stakeholders internally, I'm just repeating from our chat, but are not involved, right? And so that use in term service managers, I'm assuming you're meaning those stakeholders internally, but when somebody is saying, I need this third party, they aren't necessarily being engaged in that risk management side of it and understanding what risks they're bringing to the business. And so that is a really good point, which brings up, so when we talk about the regulations and what they say to do, a lot of the programs, whether they're really bulky and giant or they're essentially non-existent, are pointing to the regulation saying that there's, a requirement. From your perspective, Norm, does the business care?
Um, well, yes, they do, but they don't. And I think what we have to realize, and like what Frederico said, and I think Karina's really talking to this too. Let's understand this is a component for a multi-layered defense in depth program that then fits into the overall business strategy. So let's take this, having been a regulator, having been an auditor, one of the things I remind myself, the regulations exist to protect. And so if you're focused on the regulation and compliance, I will contend your security programs 5, 10 years behind because those regulations don't update. If you're in the business of protecting and being synced with your business, so your security programs dealing with threats that you face today, and then understand the why for the regulations, you're in a much better process. The executives care about that. Can I secure and meet the obligations I have? And it's not just security. I think the reason we're seeing 25% of security budgets being cut, CISOs being let go, cuts in other areas. Well, the CEOs and CFOs, most of their compensation comes from the profitability of the company. So if they're seeing, I'm going to make zero money because I have to invest in this, well, you have to then link it to why does it matter in the business flow. So when you think about supply chain, and I try to draw analogies, we're going to have to accept the fact things are going to happen. For example, we have had fires in LA. We've had MGM Caesars all had incidences. We've had a massive container ship going too fast hit the one pylon that was unprotected in the Baltimore harbor. That also affects the supply chain. So I use those analogies to how can we as an entity work together to have a program that makes sense, and where do we need that key data? And I also like to challenge stats. It's interesting. How many people are reporting third-party incidents? Well, you take CrowdStrike last summer. People tried to qualify that as a security incident. It was not. It was a technology one. But they were in so many companies, so that stat gets elevated because everybody reports the same incident. That's where I try to help executives put it in context by saying, let's look through what is the impact? What have we done preventatively? What can we do reactively? And I was amazed at how many companies really came out of a CrowdStrike type incident pretty quickly because they had the controls, the stuff in place, and to the point that he made about the stakeholders and the managers. Well, when you had a unified program, those people were able to respond in a timely fashion and mitigated the risk. Others who might have taken a week, which we've heard about, probably had some disconnects and they tried to build things in a silo, so they were more compliance oriented than protection and business oriented.
Yeah,
That's why I think the executives would care.
yeah, that's well stated. And anybody want to add anything there? All right. So I'm gonna jump to I keep saying we're going to solutions, so we keep diving into the problems, but there are a lot of problems here. So, but thinking about, a lot of companies, we've talked about the compliance versus this kind of business resiliency, solving the real risk. And so a lot of companies are using these questionnaires and relying on these compliance frameworks, but they seem to be falling short of mitigating the real risk. And so the question I would have is, what do we need to know about our third parties in order to engage them? What should we be focusing on? And I'll hand that to you. Blake, do you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, having security questionnaires, they're okay. Obviously there's a lot of industry standard ones out there like SIG or Cake or homegrown ones for that matter. I think where it becomes not very productive is some of them are very robust, right? Some of them are 200, 500 questions of yes, no. They don't really provide any contextual information of what are your controls. It's more, do you have a control? Yes, no. It's more of a check the box exercise. Pardon my language, but it's more of like the cover your ass, so to speak. Whoever filled it out said, yep, we actually have that, but they don't actually go into any meaningful information. So me as a practitioner, if I get this questionnaire, I basically look at it and I go, okay, this doesn't really provide me more information. Now I actually probably want to talk to a human and get an understanding of what are some of the core things I want to know? Like, what are your information data handling processes? Like, what does your storing look like? What does your in transit look like? How are you sub-processing this out? What does the data flow look like end to end? Like, I want to talk to a human. It's nice that you have some of the compliance frameworks like a SOC 2, especially a SOC 2 or like an ISO 27001, that it does give me some information. I can read into it, get some contextual information. But the problem with, whether it's the security questionnaire or a compliance framework is it's static. It's point in time. It doesn't evolve. Like, again, internally, if someone is using a new tool or a new third party and they're doing new integrations, like I need to be able to account for that in our heat map and turn in terms of like the risk of this third party relationship. But going back to the third party is, understanding the data flow. One would be like understanding their sub-processors. So are we relying on any critical third parties? Who are those? Where are they located? Are they located in any high-risk locations? And another big thing I would consider is, kind of their maturity or their, um, yeah, I guess maturity in terms of like their security capabilities. Is this something like as we're signing the contract, they're trying to check the box and get a SOC 2 to sign the deal, or are they proactive in actually putting, security, compliance, privacy up front by demonstrating their maturity, by having a trust center, by doing a SOC 2, by doing pen testing, by having a CISO or vCISO on call that I can call and get answers if I need to. If they don't have those things, I can guarantee they're really gonna probably screw up on handling actual real security incidents for the company that could impact us. So I'll pass it over to anyone else if you want to chime in.
I'll jump in real quick because I want to play off what Blake said. I think he's implying a certain thing there, and it's integration into the business flow. So when you're bringing on a new vendor, is the third party risk team, and I will tell you, I've dealt with organizations in the past where they come in at the 11th hour and delay their own client, their own business's objectives. So if you can encourage and be part of it from the very beginning, how do you procure the vendor? what is their role in the business process, highlighting what that risk is. And Blake hit one thing is I challenge a lot of people to actually read a SOC 2 report and the detail in it. Having done so, I did talk to one vendor who just said, "You're not big enough to warrant any feedback from you on this report." We fired that vendor and went to somebody else who had better service. So he nailed it when that's an indication of what you're going to get. And I was frustrated by that because I raised questions about their process and controls and their integrity. So since we had the year of the CEO, they were fine moving it. So there was a business impact to them. So I couldn't highlight more that the integration there of knowing where's their role in that business process, getting the stakeholders involved, including it so it's connected to the reason you're doing it, not just to do, get a report, read it, look at it, understand it in the flow.
So I'm going to actually piggyback on what both of you said. You're both really describing a very robust vendor management governance kind of program, right? You're talking about classifying vendors, honing in on the ones that are most significant, receiving SOC 2s if appropriate. And it's different for every single company, right? Because one company might not have as important of data that they're passing as another company. So to have that criteria established and to have that so again, we're back to GRC. Everything for me is back to GRC, right? So even if we're talking a vendor management program, if we can identify those actual tag-ins of what we're measuring, the KPIs and the KRIs in this case, right? And have that roll up to that governance program, now we can manage the risk against those vendors and having that pre-vetting process. And yes, reading, people don't read. I don't know why. I mean, on the very beginning of any SOC 2 I've ever read, it says subservice organizations are excluded. Right? I mean, it says that. Now, it's very unfair for for a CPA who has a background in finance to go and expect to take liability on a vendor's vendors. That's why they're excluded. It makes perfect sense. But we, as the owners of that data, need to be accountable for then understanding the further downstream tasks that are involved in that data handling.
What about when somebody's just getting started? So you mentioned like the maturity of those programs, Karina. So if somebody is just getting started to build a program, what would you say is the first thing they should focus on? What would be a way to kick off?
Identify your vendors, tier them. So I always say start with 4. You have the vendors that will never ever work on an assessment. For those blindly sending out 1,500 line assessments, don't stop and think about who you're sending them out to. There's going to be vendors that never ever receive them. There's going to be super low key vendors, like 15 questions. Do you have insurance? Thanks. Let's have a nice day. Right. The next one is going to be the more intense one, where you are passing data, where you do have APIs, where you do have service levels that really your business could be impacted by their failure. Right? Those are the ones that you really want to hone in on from an IT. Then there's going to be the ones that will never answer your questionnaire. The AWSs, the Azures of the world, they make it public for you if you take it, do your checklist yourself. If you have any questions, contact somebody directly, pick up the phone and have a conversation with them, right? So establish what you're looking out for with each type of these vendors. So start with the 4. You may have so many, you might have 20 different vendor types. Try to not, please standardize them, right? And then from there, go through the exercise of checking to make sure, do I have the contract? Do I have a breach notification commitments, folks? Warning, right? They are eluded. They are in every possible scenario non-committal. Please be careful of this, right? There will be responses like, well, lawfully, we'll let you know that we lost your data or one of our vendors lost your data. They will not commit to notifying you of a breach if they've lost your data. Make sure that this is listed somewhere in the contracts. Norman, go. I'm sorry. I can go.
No. I want to follow up on a couple of things there. You hit it. One of the key things to me in the contract and doing this, having published a number of SOC 2s, I always love putting in here are the client control considerations. So you need to be aware of what the vendor is telling you. That plays off of subservice. The other interesting one is I like to look at wording. And I love it when Karina said breach notification, because quite frankly, from a legal term, it is so specific. I actually prefer incident notification and that because I can understand earlier in the flow, because almost in every case, you probably have days, or if not weeks, prior to the determination of a breach on a legal term versus an incident. So it's understanding that flow. But I think what we're getting at is this isn't necessarily about the technicalities of contracts, SOC 2s. It's building that partner relationship and integrating it into your flows. Karina was dead on. Knowing enough and calling somebody or having your business person have that responsibility to work with their partner. And let's face it, AWS, Microsoft, those big guys, you'd be surprised how close you can get to things by reading. I'll to it, RTFM.
Mhm.
Read the freaking material. Because when you read it, understand it, you're way ahead and you don't necessarily have to make the call. Put it in the context of your operations.
Yeah, I would just add in as well, like, kind of like solutioning getting started is like risk-based approach. Karina mentioned like, tiering 1 through 4, determining what the level of, the appropriate level and breadth is for that. Because otherwise, as Norman mentioned earlier, like we have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tapes, more questionnaires and longer questionnaires are not better. So, focusing on what are the third parties that are producing the most risk to your company and figuring out a strategy to mitigate that risk, right? And then I think as Norman just said as well, is like risk acceptance, finding stakeholders, right? It can't be the requester, but someone high enough up that can accept that if there are critical issues or deficiencies of the relationship, that they're aware of it, it's brought to their attention, they can actually sign off on it. And again, do what you can to mitigate that. And then as part of it is, the deficiency, I guess, vulnerability management process of tracking deficiencies to completion. So if they don't have a SOC 2 or they're not doing SSO and they don't, have those things, making sure you start patching those up and mitigating those risks to reduce the relationship risk there as well.
So 2 quick things I want to add. In your risk questionnaire, use a number 0 through 4. Don't make it complicated, you guys, right? Just start with 0 through 4. If the answer to that question is a 0, no risk, or it's a horrible answer and it's a 4, just add up your rows and then do some ranges at the bottom. You guys, it's not rocket science, right? Just figure out a way how to quickly figure out how to do, okay, well, based on all of the answers for this vendor, they're super high risk because they hit this range, or they're no risk at all. Group hug, let's go. Let's sign this contract and we're off and away, right? So that's just a really quick recommendation. Vendor management is becoming very reminiscent of overall checkbox compliance, which we use these 12,000 row checklists, and it's just not necessary. We have to apply some just basic, for God's sakes, common sense and have it be applicable to your actual company operations.
I can't agree more. So we are coming very much up on time. So there's a couple things I just wanted to note. One, you guys have been saying this, but I think it's so important to reiterate that this isn't rocket science, and making it, these regulations don't say you have to send 1,500 questionnaires. And if you think about, I think about internally, everyone who works anywhere in security knows that no company knows all of their vulnerabilities or has everything solved, right? And so trying to then make sure that your third parties have everything solved, and you've got 500 of 5,000 third parties, it's unrealistic. And so focusing on what matters first just feels like that what I'm hearing all of you say is find the things that are the biggest risk to your business and then solve from there. And I think that's really valuable. So I'm going to say 1 minute each maybe on topic of AI. What's the one, if we only get one because of time. So what is one thing you think as a company needs to think about with AI? If it's know that there's a lot more. I'm not expecting that you're giving us all the right things, but what's the top of mind first thing you'd say go do with AI and third party? Karina, I see you look at, yeah, I'm going to hand it to you.
I love this one, right? So ISO 42001 is based on ISO 9001 principles. ISO 9001 is fundamentally what we use for QMS. QMS is a validated environment, which involves IQ, OQ, PQ, instance qualification, performance qualification, operational qualification. What this means is there's a very specific line involved with what is your input? What are you doing with it? What is your output? Right? In the case of a pharmaceutical environment, this is my recipe. What are my grams? What are my ingredients? Here's the vat I put it in, my cauldron. What's the temperature? How many times do I spin it? And here's the output. There's a pressed pill that has a number on it and it goes out to people. So if we take the same environment, sometimes you'll get a refrigerator at home and the box says, comes from an ISO 9000 certified facility. What that means is they have some of the basic maintenance in place. They have, you know, the rodent control, the fire extinguishers checked, all of these things. So that's good manufacturing practices, good documentation practices are documented in ISO 9001. ISO 42001, which is a little over a year old now, it was published December 9th, 2023, actually uses the same exact principles for AI. What is the data that you're using? What is your intended output? What is your process that you're applying to that data? What is your output? Scenario. Maybe I don't want biased data, but maybe I do. Maybe I have a drug that is different for one race or one gender as an output than for a different one, right? So maybe I want to know the characteristics of my input data so that when I manage usage, I can actually see what the reaction is. Sometimes I want no bias in my data or identifiable information in my data as I do my algorithms. Again, every single company is different. You have to create your own parameters, but please create an AI policy, please, because your folks are playing with it. And unless you've given them parameters and specifically said, you shall never put in our employee data, our customer data, our company financial data, our intellectual property data into AI, internal or external. Well, of course, internal is safer. You can assume that folks are playing with AI, and because you haven't given them any parameters, they're going to do whatever the hell they want. So just make sure you give that guidance.
Norm or Blake, anything to add to that? Open up.
I'll be happy to go. I'll keep it simple. Embrace it. It's key to the business, and focus on the fundamentals.
I'll keep it short as well. Kind of as Karina mentioned, have the AI policy, make sure that it's readily available and communicated to employees so they know it exists. And same thing with Norman, like embrace it, and yeah, go from there.
Cool. All right. I want to open it up for questions, but just real quickly as we wrap this up, I think we may have some follow-ups. We've talked about the fact that there's so much to talk about here, is kind of opening up the conversation. We might do some more focused conversations down the road, so look for those to come up. Additionally, just Blake will be speaking at the TPRA conference that is in South Carolina on April 7th and 9th, I think. So I'll be there as well. Love to see anybody who will be there. Reach out to us. Also, Karina, I forget what you have going. You have another event coming up, and then we will also both be at RSA, but go ahead and tell us.
So I've got the ISACA Spring Conference. I'm a speaker at April 14th. And then, of course, we were also going to talk about RSA and Black Hat.
And to that point, Norm, you have something you're working on. I want to,
Yep.
Sarah's
If you
coming.
people want, yeah, if you want to monitor my LinkedIn profile, I'm working with a firm. We're coming out with an accreditation program related to data security, and it's very much focused on the fundamentals that allow a professional from tactical up to even the executive layer to get some awareness, education exams, and CPE credit too for being accredited in the fundamentals of data security. So look for that. It should be coming out in the next several weeks and potentially introduced at RSA.
Awesome. And then I also have a group that we do these virtual meetups from time to time, and there is one next Friday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, where we'll be talking about AI and data classification, really revisiting data classification to the fundamentals of, we're bringing in data. It's not just what data, it's what permissions we have when we collect the data that then impacts AI. So it's really a much more complicated world than it used to be to say this is confidential, this isn't. So we'll be talking about that. That is just a free for all. Come join, share your ideas. We'll chat through it together. So with that, if anybody have any questions, if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand, we'll let you talk.
And while we're waiting, I want to say that we're going to have a calendar available for RSA scheduling as well. So if you're at RSA, come find us, please. There's going to be 3 or 4 of us there this year for Clever Compliance.
Yep, I will also be there. It sounds like some chance Norm will show up. We'll see. So awesome. Well, I don't see any questions from the crowd. So thank you everybody for joining. We will certainly keep you posted to further conversations. And if there are particular areas in third-party risk that you want to talk about, shout. And I know also, I think all of us are happy to talk about GRC as well. So awesome. Thank you.
All
And
right.
thank you,
so
Blake
much.
and Norman and Karina. This
Thank
is
you for having
fantastic.
us. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everyone.
It's an honor.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, one and all.